Hey, I'm Tim Max, and this is a song breakdown of my song Broken. If you haven't heard the track, I'll leave a link to it below. Today we're going to be talking about mastering the song. We've already done videos on the verses, the drops, the vocals of the song, and mixing the song, and so today we're going to be talking about mastering. Now, I've said in the previous videos, I usually set up my project file so that I can master within the project file, and that I don't actually have to export to a stereo track to then master from there. So all of my tracks are going into some group channels, and then the group channels are going into this mix channel. So the first step I usually do is I turn the mix channel down by about 5 decibels, and the mix channel sends directly to the master channel. Now, what we'll also do, one of the very first steps of mastering, is we're going to put a filter on the mix channel, and we're going to roll everything under 40 hertz off. And that's going to take away a lot of those subharmonic elements, which will really stress out a lot of speakers, and don't actually add a lot to your mix, because most of what the human ear picks up as the kind of sub-bass kind of sounds are actually above 40 hertz. So the speakers will try to replicate the sounds, and it requires so much energy that it'll actually make the rest of your mix sound soft, which is not what you want. So first of all, take 40 hertz and everything and roll it off. Now, the other thing I'm going to do with the mix, if I just play it back quickly, I've talked about this in some of my tutorials, but I am going to add what is called a Baxandall curve. And basically what that does is, and you'll see it here if I enable this EQ, I've basically just taken the high part of the EQ, and from about 500 hertz and above, I'm putting a big curve that just raises it by about a decibel. So it curves very gradually up, and what that will do is actually just give a little bit extra kind of snap in the high end. It'll make the song kind of punch through a little bit more. Now, I'm not sure whether that comes through on YouTube or not. If you can't hear the difference between that and it does come through on YouTube, then you need to continue to train your ears, because there is a difference between the two, and you need to listen to elements like the hi-hats and that kind of thing to notice it. I'll try it and play it again and see if you can hear it. First of all, we'll start with it off. Okay, ignore the glitch in there. That's just my computer trying to record this tutorial, play back the song. There's a lot of elements on this song, a lot of reverb going through, so it's just stressing out a little bit with all of that. Okay, next step. Now that we've slightly tweaked the EQ of the mix, we've also rolled off everything below 40 hertz. We're sending it to the master channel, and what we're going to do on the master channel is apply a multiband compressor. You can use any multiband compressor. I like to use the Vengeance multiband compressor. And normally what I would do in here is I would have a reference song. Because of YouTube copyright issues, I'm not going to put the reference song in this video. What you want to do is have a reference song that you kind of want your song to sound like, and you want to try as much as possible to listen to the different bands, the different frequency bands of that song, and hear what they're doing, what kind of compression they're doing to get their song to sound the way it is. So this is the actual compressor settings, multiband compressor settings that I'm using as the master on this track. And I will play it back for you now all together, and then we'll isolate the different frequencies and listen to it like that. Okay, so let's first of all listen to the bass. It's pretty standard. The bass on dance songs is usually compressed quite a bit, and you can see in the waveform down here that there's only a slight little bit of difference between the bass and the kick. Now, when we mixed it, we left 12 decibels between the bass and the kick, and that was because we knew we were going to compress it, and so the bass would be actually coming up to sit much higher where that kick sits. If we left no room in the mix for the bass to be volume to be expanded, then what we'd be left with is something where the kick sounds too low, the bass sounds too loud, and it would all just sound very, very muddy. Now, to talk about the settings on this compressor, in general, this is a rough rule. It doesn't apply to every single track, but you usually want to find the lowest point in the bass frequency and set your compressor threshold to be maybe 1 or 2 decibels or maybe 3 decibels below where the lowest point on the song is. So you can see the highest point there's much, much higher. If I find one of the verses, for example, so now, because I didn't want to boost the bass too much in the verse, but you can see that the vocal just kind of peaks at around that minus 24 decibels. So we'll go back to the drop at the end here and play that. So let's jump ahead. So you can see the compressor ratio is actually not too harsh. It's a kind of reasonable bend. The attack is set to 3 milliseconds. That's allowing the kick drum, the initial hit of the kick drum to pop through. The release is about 13 milliseconds, and then I'm also boosting it by 6 decibels, and what that's doing is bringing that bass up higher to where the kick was. Okay, moving on to the low mid-range. Again, similar settings. In general, the low mid-range, you don't want to compress it too much, and you can see in the settings there, it's similar to the bass. The threshold's actually a little bit higher though, and basically what that's doing is just allowing the low mids a little bit more chance to breathe. In general, if you talk about the 4 bands of a song in dance music, the bass band will be very compressed, the low mid band perhaps not as much, the upper mid band will be pretty much very compressed, just a little bit more than the lower mids, and then the high range will be very compressed as well. So you kind of want that mid range, which is where a lot of the human ear hears the song, to just ease off on the compression just a little bit. Okay, so moving on to the upper midsection, you can see that the threshold is actually a lot lower, and that's because we really want to compress this section a lot more. We want everything to kind of come together and sound like the one track. And the way we're doing that is by compressing it. The attack's very quick, the ratio is a little bit higher, and it sounds like this. Okay, and then the same thing for the higher range. Again, the threshold's a bit lower than minus 24 decibels. The ratio is a bit higher here, but what we're going to do is, you can see there's a mix knob here. Ideally, you want your whatever compressor you're using to have a mix knob for each band so that you can compress it as much as you want it, and then if you need to ease off, you can just tweak the mix knob rather than having to play with all of the individual settings. So for the high end, what we want to do is just pull off on it a little bit. Now, if I play it with the mix all the way up, you can hear it's very, very, very crunchy. So you just want to back off a little bit. And then we'll play it all together. Now you can say, actually, yes, this is peaking, and what are you going to do about that? Now, this is dance music, it needs to peak. The best thing you can do, and this is what I do here, is to run it out of your computer into some sort of analog system, even if it is just something that's got a headphone jack or anything where you can then route the sound back into your computer and record it. And what that'll do is, instead of the computer pumping to try to maximize this sound and it's peaking, Analog Gear will be able to handle the peaks better because it's something physical that's pushing to that limit. So if you play your mix out either through an analog compressor or through an analog, I just myself use a Scarlett sound card, which has a headphone out, and that basically allows me to use the same kind of pump and real energy that the device would use to play it into a speaker, and I can just route that straight back into the computer and record it back as something that will be peaking but won't actually distort. So I can't recommend that enough, to use some analog gear in the mastering process. The last step of mastering is to apply a stereo enhancer, and I've kind of set this halfway in between being completely widened and being normal where it was. So there is already some stereo enhancing on specific instruments, but for the master, we want to just kind of widen everything because it creates a more pleasing sound. So I'm going to play it, and then I'll bypass the effect and turn it on and off, and you can hear what it sounds like. You can actually hear it kind of makes those lead sounds come alive. Without it, they sit right in the middle of the mix, which is great, but the sounds themselves need to be widened to kind of get that fuller sound. So that's it. If you guys enjoyed this song breakdown, subscribe. I'm going to be doing more videos like this. Let me know if there's any other videos you'd like to see, and I'll see you next time.